Thank you again for joining us. So excited to hear a little bit about your experience. So if you could start with sharing your name, where you graduate, which department you graduated from, and talk to us a little bit about the fellowship.
Sure. So my name is Beth Linus. I did my master's and PhD in infectious disease epidemiology at the Department of Epidemiology at Hopkins. And I graduated in 2014 and did a brief postdoc before I went to the National Science Foundation. I was placed at the National Science Foundation through the fellowship that's called the American Association for the Advancement of Science, Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. It's a mouthful. For short, it's AAAS STPF. The fellowship, I learned about this from a program officer at the NIH. After attending a conference, one of my third year of graduate school, I saw that a program officer was doing a lot of interesting work in smart and connected health and digital health. And I asked to talk to her, and she invited me to her office in Bethesda. And she was actually the person that explained to me what the AAAS Fellowship was. And the purpose of the fellowship is to bring PhD level scientists into policy and to then also train PhD level scientists about policy. So there is a lot of discussion and interest and need in evidence-based decision making. But you would be surprised to learn that on the Hill, there aren't resources for Congress people to double check data or make sure they're understanding a topic. And so the fellowship's role is to bring more highly trained individuals into the government for at least 2 years. And it's a matching program. So you apply and then they select you, and then you go through sort of a match of where you want to work across the federal government.
Wow, that sounds so awesome. I mean, I didn't even know that that was an opportunity, let alone that from epidemiology, that would be something that you would be interested in.
Yeah.
I'd love to know a little bit more about what you ended up doing in the fellowship and, what were the couple of years like for you?
Sure, yeah. And so the thing that was the most interesting about the fellowship is they also want to stretch your skill set because they want to show that the skills you have in graduate school can apply to a vast number of areas and topics and tasks. And so I ended up at the National Science Foundation. And if you are familiar with epidemiology, you know that's a tenet of public health, and the National Science Foundation does not do public health. They are very foundationally based, foundational science, computer science, engineering organization. They're separate from the NIH. And so I was a bit nervous when I ended up getting matched to a program at the NSF because I didn't know much about the NSF. It turned out that I was actually being matched into a program called Smart and Connected Health. And the program at NSF is where engineering researchers create widgets and gadgets, for lack of a better word, that are meant to be for healthcare, public health. And the program that I helped manage is a joint operation between NIH and NSF, and they fund those engineers to then learn how to evaluate or test their products. And the reason why the program is jointly managed is so that engineers can have an opportunity to work with any other scientists they may meet at the NIH that come from the NIH side. And so I was really, as a fellow in a program that's not huge, it wasn't a huge program, I worked very closely with the program officer, writing the solicitation, updating the solicitation each year. There are 2 dates for the solicitation, getting the applications in, screening the applications and the grants, putting together objective review panels, reaching out to the community to ask for people's availability, and then setting up all the different topics of the review panels. There was not just one review panel for Smart and Connected Health. There was many topics beneath that. Additionally, during the program, I also did a lot of professional development with AAAS themselves. They had a lot of speakers come in, sort of highlighting the skills that we have in graduate school that are known as soft skills that actually are skills you can use way you don't realize that you have, and you can use them more easily. So think project management. And I also had the opportunity to sort of go around the national academies really, and go to any free lecture or talk that I wanted to in DC, because part of the fellowship gives you sort of time off from work to go sort of enrich yourself.
That's, I always love that the different tentacles, for the lack of a
Yeah.
better word, that you can like
Yeah.
flex and like learn on.
Yeah. And also I didn't mention I had the opportunity to sit on, there are a lot of interagency working groups within the federal government. And so I was able to sit on a few interagency working groups as a fellow to learn sort of how do all these agencies work together, say, in smart and connected cities or in AI. So that was also something I got to do.
What's NAI?
Oh, AI, sorry.
Oh, wait.
Artificial intelligence.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Cool.
Yeah.
So what was the application process like from what you recall?
So the application process, I think, was actually pretty, I won't say hard. It's very extensive. So you first apply. So the first round of applications is due in November. Simple sort of, who are you? What do you think this fellowship could do for your career? And what do you want to do with this experience? There is then, if you make it towards the next round, they ask you to actually draft a 1-page policy brief, and they give you a couple different options of topics. I believe I ended up choosing mine to be, it was on vaccine preventable diseases, which is actually sort of funny now that where we are today, and write a policy memo about why whatever you decide is the policy is something that's necessary. After you submit that, if you make it to the next round, they'll do a Zoom, sort of a panel interview over Zoom with several different people from AAAS. And then lastly, if you make it through that, you'll be invited to DC. They'll house you for a week as you go around to different agencies to see where you would want to be placed. So what happens is AAAS takes in your applications. It then disperses the applications to all the agencies that are participating in the fellowship. Those agencies say they would like to talk to A, B, and C. And then when you come to DC, you'll set up, we'll go talk to those individuals. You can also set up other additional interviews when you're in town. At the end of that process, you then say what your top 3 choices are. And by the end of June, you are matched.
Wow, that sounds really extensive.
It's pretty extensive, but I will say that it really helps you get a sense of what you're getting, or like what the program is, because there's sort of dynamic, there's lots of different people, and it's actually quite fun.
Any recommendations or tips or things that you would say, hey, this is what you should think about before applying to a fellowship like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always say that the best thing I did with my PhD was fellowship, mostly because I learned, it was during the fellowship that I learned that there's so much of science and science communication, scientific topics that I don't know about, despite having very similar training to a lot of the people that I was in this class with, right? You know, we all went through some sort of master's level work, prelims, writing a dissertation, oral presentations, that sort of thing. I think the biggest thing for me that helped me was to not only talk to the program officer that introduced me to the project, but then through her, I found some other people who had recently finished the fellowship and asked them about their experiences, specifically individuals who were coming from sort of the health sciences side. A lot of AAAS fellows were not sort of in the health sciences. I was only one of 3 public health students the year I started in 2015. And I spoke to some of the outgoing fellows before I got started who worked, who were matched at USAID and doing HIV work. So it was really helpful to talk to and learn about some alum from the program.
And how has the fellowship affected or influenced your work pursuing a non-academic career outside of, outside of the fellowship?
Yeah, totally. So I think the biggest thing is that I knew and understood that, the field of science is vast and large and wide and many different areas. I didn't actually have a good sense of how I could end up working alongside these scientists on a daily basis pretty regularly. And I think what the fellowship allowed me to do was to push me out of my comfort zone, to meet people that might not sort of think about the same way that I think, but also sort of introduced me to other areas that are applicable in public health. So I work with a lot of climate scientists when I was at NSF. That's a really big portion of the NSF portfolio. And I had learned in graduate school some determinants of health, their impact on their impact on population health or community health. But I really got a sense of some more hands-on direct experience of what that actually looks like coming out of the NSF. And I enjoyed learning. I also enjoyed learning a more common language. So a lot of the times my fellows would be talking about similar things using different words. And so it really it made me it helped me learn to be very concrete and explicit in what I'm saying without using jargon, so that we could all be on the same page. As far as how the fellowship has impacted me, the fellowship really opened my eyes to how wide and big the federal government is, and just everywhere that scientists can be needed and used. You think that it might just be at the NIH or the EPA, but science policy and thinking through any sort of study design or data, it's all needed across the federal government, and we're trained how to in that. So it sort of showed me, and there are far more opportunities for me than I initially realized.
Awesome, Beth. This was great and so helpful. Any last comments or thoughts that you'd add for current and future doctoral students interested in non-academic careers or thinking about what to do after a doctoral degree?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it is not a failure if you decide not to stay in academia. I think there's a little bit of a misconception that if you're not going to be writing a K award or a NERSA, for example, or something along those lines, that you wouldn't have made it as an academic or as a scientist. And that's not true. There are a lot of places and manners with which scientists can show up and use their skill set. And so I wouldn't be down on yourself if you're thinking, I don't know if academia is for me. What's really good news is that the skills you're getting as a PhD student so widely, and they might be called soft skills, but they are really helpful skills to make your career what you want them to be. I also would say that if you're not sure what you want to do, just talk to more people. People love to talk about themselves and their careers and their paths. And through those conversations, you might get an idea and say, oh, that's something I might like to try. So my pro tip is cold emails. Always, for me, I welcome them as long as they're sort of an introduction. And I often find myself talking to people just about my career and my career trajectory, and it really helps them sort of understand what they can do.
Awesome. I really appreciate this, Beth. Thank you so much.
Was it too wordy?